Can you hear us? Captain!
Do you hear us?
Ah, well, I guess we're talking about Frostpunk 2 today. I do as the green screen commands. Frostpunk 2 is the sequel to the critically acclaimed survival city builder Frostpunk, a story-driven single-player experience that asks you one simple question: how far are you willing to go to save the city, if you can at all? I, on the other hand, have a totally different question to answer. Can Frostpunk 2 live up to the greatness that was the original, or will it be cast out into the icy wastes, exiled from the warmth of the generator that is Banger Games? But before we get into that, let's go over some background for the studio. 11-Bit Studios was originally founded on September 11th, 2010, exactly 9 years after a totally normal day where nothing bad happened. Don't fact check that. They started their game development journey through some rather obscure games like Anomaly, Warzone Earth, and Funky Smugglers. However, they didn't hit their stride until 2014 with the release of the critically acclaimed narrative story-driven game This War of Mine, a side-scrolling survival game that pits you as civilians trying to survive in an active war zone. This game was a massive hit, selling around 700,000 copies in the first year and teaching many people that, hey, maybe war kinda sucks. This breakaway hit pushed the studio towards more gritty, story-driven experiences, with their next game being the massively popular Frostpunk. This game blew the sales figure of This War of Mine out of the water, selling over 250,000 copies in just the first 3 days. Its mix of tough choices, choose-your-own-adventure-esque storytelling, and gritty, harsh world proved to be hugely popular and brought 11-Bit Studios further into the mainstream gaming consciousness. I've personally played every one of the DLC missions, as well as beating the main game on the oppressively difficult survival mode, and can vouch for just how amazing this game is. It's just great. I love it. Quick side note, I will be avoiding all major spoilers for the second Frostpunk, as the storytelling and ambience are a hugely important part of both the first and second Frostpunks. However, there might be some very minor spoilers, mostly relating around like game mechanics and stuff. With all that preamble out of the way, let's get into it. Frostpunk 2 starts out 30 years after the first game, your character from then rambling on about survival and whatnot while looking like a desiccated corpse, shortly before turning into one. Your character is the protege of the old captain and is chosen to become the next leader of the city. Right away, and in a more grandiose fashion than the first game, you are shoved in the middle of both a grand ambition of expanding the city past its meager crater-like home and a looming fuel crisis, as the coal seams that the city has been surviving on for the first 3 decades are at the edge of exhaustion. The opening and the first few minutes of gameplay past the prologue are exactly what made the original stand out. Gritty storytelling mixed with tough decisions. This, as well as the overall aesthetic of the game, are, however, some of the only things that survive the overall structure of the first game. As we are brought into the map of the city, the first thing that you will notice if you played the first game is the sheer scale of the map. The very center of your burgeoning megacity being the entire map of the original game.
Damn, boy. Damn, boy, he's thick. Boy, that's a thick-ass boy.
With this newfound space comes a different way of building out our city. Instead of placing individual homes, resource production buildings, and heating, you place districts in sets of 6 tiles, which can be further expanded by 3 tiles for production districts and another 3 tiles for housing districts. Placing these districts down has a reminiscent feel of the first game, but overall feels a lot more shallow and less impactful, especially as the game progresses. In the original game, you had to plan out your buildings in order to maximize the effectiveness of either your central generator or steam hubs in order to prevent your people from freezing or from you running out of coal. And you needed to upgrade your generator to produce higher amounts of heat as the air temperatures got colder. However, in Frostpunk 2, you have an overall heat demand which is increased based on a per district basis and fluctuates with the temperature. There is no heat level, just an increase in fuel usage as your heat demand increases. This usage can be mitigated by having 3 tiles touching a separate district, a steam hub, or inside of a protective piece of the environment like a hole in the ground. And like a sandpaper-laden sex toy, this change doesn't feel very good. It takes out a lot of the little bits that made the temperature system super rewarding in the first game. The risk versus reward of placing your buildings has been stripped, replaced by a fairly easy to grasp but overall shallow system. Past this, it's also an all-or-nothing system, where you can have a district be touching 2 tiles each of 4 other districts and not get any bonuses. While yes, the original game had heat work a similar way, wherein a building was either inside a heat zone or not, at least it had levels to how warm the building was that had huge effects on the overall gameplay. This new system just feels kinda lame. Now, while this change is a fairly disappointing one, the changes to government and laws is one that I think is far better than in the original game. For the first Frostpunk, the government system was that of a potato penis. A dictator. Every few days you could select a new law and a branching tree of choices, giving positive and negative effects. Want child labor? Yeah! Want alcohol in fight pits? Go ahead. Want to jail dissidents without even a hint of a fair trial? Hell, they'll practically jump into the jail cells themselves. The style of government works in regards to the theming of the first game. You are a ragtag group of survivors barely holding on in the midst of the apocalypse after all. But I think both in theme and in actual gameplay value that Frostpunk 2 has a much more interesting government style. Frostpunk 2 adopts the structure of Parliament. A very British choice if I do say so, old chap. With this edition, you don't entirely get to choose what kind of laws are enacted. You pick which laws you want to vote on, and depending on the demographics of your city, certain groups will vary in their vote in support of the law. And this is where the new law system is really fun. Let's say you want to enact a law for child apprentices to fill the gaps in your workforce early on in the game. You really do need all the hands you can get early on, even if they are a little small. You might be able to pass the law without any interference, or you could negotiate with one of the political parties in your city to enact a law they like, so they'll vote yes on this one. Sometimes you really don't want to chance it. This adds a lot of depth to the game, as you might want to pass a certain law and need to go through a chain of favors in order to get it done and make sure that everyone stays favorable to you. This leads me into a connected mechanic, favor. As you play the game, you will need to balance your reputation with each of the factions. Almost everything that you do will have an impact on how each of the factions see you. Put down a refurbished goods factory? Stalwarts don't really like that. Enact a law giving better pay to better workers based on merit? Pilgrims ain't gonna be too happy. I found myself making certain choices as the game progressed in order to curry favor from different groups, which honestly felt kinda cool. You're basically the prime minister trying to keep as many groups happy as possible, while also trying to keep everyone from dying, and I really like that. The favor part, not the dying part. On top of this, you also get requests from these groups depending on what is happening in the city. Have disease shoot up due to a bio hothouse giving everyone delicious E. coli? Well, the city as a whole might want you to enact a law that curbs the disease rate in the city. Low on money? The pilgrims have an idea on how to solve that issue. These requests can be a fair bit more open-ended than asking for favors in a council session, but they can also be very specific. I found myself trying really hard to make these requests happen, as the reputation boost you get can be a fantastic resource. That being said, with how cool this system is, I do think it's kinda silly that you only have one election in the entire game when you first build the council chambers, which is actually kinda sucky as well, since you can get voted out at the very start of the game without actually doing much of anything. This happened to me on my first 2 starts, as I didn't want to negotiate on something so close to the beginning of the game, but that's besides the point. I think it would be cool to balance your political relationships more consistently as the game progresses. Maybe having an election every year or something, though they might have tried that in closed playtests and decided to get rid of it. In the end, I think they should have either had regular elections or none at all, as losing the game at the start despite doing nothing wrong is kinda silly. But a wise man once said,
"It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness. That is life."
There can also be cool combos with certain buildings and laws. I only found one in my main playthrough of the game, being foraged additives and bio hothouses, giving a boost to food production. But I do find it cool how laws and building choices can create synergies, and that they're not readily apparent in the UI. This really helps boost replayability, as each time you play the game you can have different factions present in your city, and thus different combos of tech and laws that come about naturally as a side effect of these systems. Now, one of the major additions to this game are chapters. You could say that the original game had discrete chapters as you went through, being the Londoners trying to leave, refugees flooding the city, and the Great Storm, but these weren't specified directly as chapters and are more like important inflections in the story as a whole. Frostpunk 2, on the other hand, has 5 distinct chapters and a prologue. These chapters are very important to both the story and gameplay as they create inflection points and new goals to strive for. On top of this, at the beginning of each chapter, you are given an important decision as far as your city is governed, splitting down a branching tree of choices that I think is pretty cool. These seemingly tend to favor one faction or the other, stalwarts or pilgrims, and bring you towards their faction's ideals. As far as these factions go, I believe the Steam page shows many different factions that could potentially be a part of your game, but in the few runs that I did, I only ever saw pilgrims and stalwarts, the latter of which being chosen in the prologue. I believe these factions are chosen based on what you do in the opening parts of the game, but I'm not entirely sure. These ideals, mind you, are an intrinsic and important mechanic of the game. As you continue down the tech tree, choosing different buildings and laws to research, you bring yourself closer to 6 unique cornerstones of the city, each being in pairs contrasting each other. Be careful though, as you get close to one cornerstone or the other, you will start to see tensions rise as the contrast between laws and buildings of one cornerstone push up against the other. I like this addition as it really helps add some weight to some of your decisions that I think is sorely missing from the rest of the game. This lack of weight brings me to my next major point, and that's just how impersonable everything feels. In the original game, everything was on a much smaller scale. You start the game with only a generator, 80 people, and a dream of one day having a big titty goth girlfriend. You end up growing far more attached to each individual person because of this. A single death, especially early on, feels like a huge loss, both in terms of your workforce as well as a hit to your ego. If only I was able to get enough coal, then little Timmy might not have froze to death out in his gathering hut. This is compounded by the fact that it is very difficult to get any new people. You either have to find them as you explore or get past the Londoners event to get refugees. Once you lose a person, they're not coming back. They're dead, gone, poof. In contrast, you start the second game with a whopping 8,000 people. This erodes that sense of importance for your citizens, relegating them to become just a statistic rather than being viewed as a person. Who gives a shit about little Timmy? Those production quotas won't hit themselves. Huh. Is there an allegory here somewhere for modern society? Nah. On top of this, if you end up losing a few thousand people later on in the game, it kind of just doesn't matter. At one point I ended up basically sacrificing 3,000 people in order to complete a specific story beat, and still had an extra 10,000 available workers to throw around. This really ends up with the game losing that emotional weight that I think made the first game excel past just being a good game, and turning it into an amazing experience. But that isn't to say that this game doesn't have its moments. Particularly, I think that the graphics, sound design, music, and ambience are all 10 out of 10. The music in particular really helps pull you in at certain times, elevating the experience much closer to the first game than it would be otherwise. I mean, listen to this orchestral music. So with all that said, we have yet to answer the final question. Is Frostpunk 2 a worthy sequel? And I think the answer is sadly no. All in all, it's still a good game and very fun, but just doesn't create the same levels of emotional investment that really set Frostpunk apart from many other city builders, survival games, or narrative experience. Do I keep that take? Shit. It's still a worthy buy, but don't expect the same thing as Frostpunk. Similar, but different. A quick side note as well, it seems that Frostpunk 2 did not do as well as 11-bit Studios was hoping it would, and have said that they are moving away from doing single-player story-driven experiences, and I think that's a terrible shame. You had one game that wasn't as popular as you had hoped and are pulling away from the genre that caused your company to explode in popularity? That seems silly to me, and I can see a lot of sentiment online as more or less, if they're moving away from story-driven games, then I'm moving away from buying their games. Which I can totally understand. I'd probably be in the same boat. If you got this far in the video, thank you. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It means a lot to me. I'd also like to thank everyone that was super supportive in my previous video. It really helped push away all of the self-doubt that I had towards my content. You can watch that aforementioned video here. You can also follow me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/vundo and over at Blue Sky. Also join my Discord, links will be in the description. Thank you again, and bye-bye. Bye. Bye.